Clara looked out the window, the morning sunlight shining through the green trees, creating sparkling streaks of light on the floor. Everything in her small house is very peaceful, but the emotions in her heart are not at all peaceful. She has lived here, in this house, almost all her life with the belief that love and family will be the source of motivation to help her overcome all challenges. But it seems things are not that simple. When Clara married Ethan, she thought her life would change in a positive way. Ethan is a wonderful husband who loves and cares for her. However, there is one thing that Clara cannot predict, which is her relationship with her mother-in-law, Margaret. Margaret is a strong woman who always upholds family traditions and has very high standards. Although Clara always tried everything to please her, Margaret never truly accepted her as part of the family. She always favored Lisa, her daughter, and all her attention was devoted to her, making Clara feel like an outsider. Every time she visited Margaret, Clara felt her cold eyes, sarcastic words, or advice without any affection. She didn't understand why her grandmother had such an attitude towards her, even though she always tried to do everything the best she could. But in the end, Clara realized that Margaret would never accept her, no matter what she did. Clara's only wish is to be able to build a happy family where she is loved and appreciated. She doesn't ask for much, just sympathy and respect from her husband's family. But it seems that Margaret never has enough. One morning, Clara sat with Ethan in the living room, the light coming through the window illuminating his face. "Are you okay?" Ethan asked, his voice filled with concern. Clara nodded, trying to smile. "I'm fine, it's just, I feel like I don't really belong here." Ethan looked at her with loving eyes. "I know, you did everything you could. But my mother, that's just the way she is." Clara knew he was right, but every time she went to her mother-in-law's house, every time Margaret looked at her with those cold eyes, she felt like an extra person. This made her feel tired and painful, and it seemed like everything she did wasn't enough to change her attitude. The sadness in Clara's heart gradually became greater. She begins to feel like a ghost in her own home, always trying to please everyone but unable to receive recognition. And that began to affect her mood, making her feel like she was losing her purpose in life. But no matter how painful it was, Clara still did not give up hope. She believes that one day Margaret will realize what she did and maybe change her attitude. She wanted to be part of this family, not just for Ethan, but for herself. However, things are about to change in a way that Clara could not have expected. Things started to get tense one summer evening when Clara decided to visit Margaret and Lisa, as usual. Clara knew that every time she entered that house, she would face cold looks from Margaret, but she still hoped that one day everything would change. She wants her husband's family to see her as an indispensable part of their lives. But that day, things went beyond her limit. Mrs. Margaret looked at Clara indifferently, as if she were not worthy of her attention. "Are you back?" Margaret asked without looking up, her voice dry as if she were talking to a stranger. Clara just smiled and nodded, trying not to let her discomfort show on her face. She didn't want to create more tension, but the silence in the room made Clara feel like an outsider. "Can I help Mom with anything?" Clara asked gently, trying to create a pleasant conversation. "No need," Margaret replied, her eyes still not leaving the book in her hand. "Everything has been taken care of by Lisa." Clara felt a little disappointed, but she didn't want to appear weak. She went into the kitchen and began preparing a snack, hoping to make Margaret happy. But when she returned to the living room, the sight before her made her almost unable to breathe. Lisa, who Clara always tried to be friends with, was sitting on the sofa, her arm around Margaret's shoulder. smiling and talking intimately as if Clara didn't exist. Clara saw a clear lack of respect in the way they treated her. She couldn't understand why she was treated like this, even though she tried her best to integrate and present herself as a member of the family. Mrs. Margaret looked at Clara coldly. "Clara, I think you should leave early. I don't want you and Lisa to bother each other." Clara was stunned by her words. All her previous efforts suddenly disappeared into meaninglessness. She felt herself being rudely sent away, and although she tried to stay calm, Clara couldn't stop feeling hurt. She looked at Ethan, who just sat silently next to him, not daring to speak. Can I go home early?" Clara asked Ethan, her voice shaking, trying to hold back her tears. Ethan looked at her, his eyes sad, but he couldn't do anything. He knew clearly about the relationship between her and his mother, but he could not interfere. "I'm sorry, Clara, but if you want to go home, I'll go home with you." Clara nodded, but her heart felt heavy. She didn't want to make things more tense, but the feeling of being kicked out made her feel like an extra person in the house she considered her family. On the way home, Clara said nothing. Ethan looked at her, his eyes sad. "You know, my mother, she doesn't easily accept someone outside the family." Clara looked out the window, her heart heavy. "I don't understand. I've done everything right, Ethan. I don't know what else I have to do to make her accept me." Ethan didn't answer right away. He understood Clara's feelings, but he also understood that his mother was a difficult person, and she did not change easily. But Clara cannot accept Margaret's indifference. She felt like she was being pushed out of the family she had tried to build. That night, as she lay in bed, Clara couldn't sleep. She thought about everything she had done, all her efforts, and wondered if she was doing it wrong. But no, Clara clearly knew that she was not wrong. She tried her best, and no one had the right to treat her like this. She decided that she would not let Margaret and Lisa continue to hurt her like that anymore. The next day, Clara decided she would no longer be silent. She was tired of cold words and eyes. She knows that if this situation doesn't change, she will always be the one pushed out of their lives. She will have to find a way to regain respect, even if it means facing resistance from Margaret and Lisa. Clara turns to Jessica, a longtime friend who has experienced difficulties in her husband's family. Jessica gives Clara some important advice, helping her find strength within herself. She tells Clara that sometimes patience is not the only way. Clara needs to stand up and defend her rights, even if it means facing strong opposition. After thinking carefully, Clara decided she would not let herself be defeated. She prepares a meeting with Margaret and Lisa, not only to express her feelings, but also to find a solution for this relationship. She couldn't let Margaret continue to behave like that anymore. This is Clara's chance to prove that she deserves to be respected and loved as a real member of this family. That day, Clara couldn't stop thinking about the upcoming meeting. She felt tense and anxious, but also had a new faith. A faith she had never felt so clearly before. She decided that she would not let her mother-in-law and Lisa continue to control her life. Clara knows that there must be a confrontation, an uncompromising war, and she will not back down any longer. It's not only for her, but also for Ethan, the husband she loves and wants to build a happy family. When Clara entered Margaret's house that afternoon, she was sitting in the living room holding a cup of tea, her cold eyes looking out the window. Clara walked in, trying to stay calm, but her heart was in turmoil. "Hello, Margaret," Clara said, her voice gentle but determined. Mrs. Margaret did not answer immediately, just nodded slightly without taking her eyes off the scene outside the window. Clara felt a clear distance from her, but she couldn't stay silent forever. She decided to walk over and sit in the chair opposite her. "Can you spare some time for me to talk?" Clara asked. Margaret didn't look at her, just sighed and put down the teacup. "Sure, Clara. What do you want to say?" Clara looked into her eyes, trying to control her rising emotions. "You know, I've always tried to have a family that I can call my own, but I feel like I'm just an outsider in this house. I don't understand why you always look down on me, even though I do my best." Clara stopped, took a deep breath. Mrs. Margaret said nothing, just looked at Clara with cold eyes. "I love Ethan, and I want him to feel happy, but I can't continue living in a family that doesn't receive respect from the people who matter most to him." Clara paused for a moment, letting her words sink in. "I'm not the one who came here to bother or take anyone's place. I just want to be part of this family." A long moment of silence passed, and Clara clearly felt the tension in the air. Mrs. Margaret finally spoke. Her voice was cold, but also a little incomprehensible. "Clara, do you know, I'm always worried about my daughter, Lisa. She's the only person I can trust. You've never understood our relationship." Clara felt like her heart was being squeezed. "So what about you?" Clara asked, her voice almost choking. "Who am I in your eyes? Certainly not part of this family." At that moment, the door suddenly opened and Lisa walked in, cold eyes looking at Clara. "Mom, what did you say to her?" Lisa spoke up, unable to hide the contempt in her voice. Clara looked at Lisa, trying not to let her anger show. "I just want to talk to Margaret about our relationship and about how she treats me," Clara replied, her voice calm but sharp. Lisa did not show any surprise. "And what? You think you have the right to speak up? You're nothing. My mother took care of you for Ethan, but you think you can change everything?" Lisa raised her face, her voice arrogant. Clara felt like she was twisted in anger, but she couldn't let herself lose her temper. "I hate to say this, but if Margaret and you continue to treat me like this, I won't be able to continue living in this house." Clara stood up and decided to leave, but did not forget to add one more sentence. "I will not be silent anymore. I deserve a happy and respected life." Clara's words rang out in the quiet space as a clear challenge to Margaret and Lisa. She didn't know where things were going, but she knew she couldn't take it anymore. As Clara got back in the car and drove home, she was overcome with emotion. She didn't know what would happen next, but she felt that today, everything had changed. She is no longer the weak girl who suffered silently. She stood up and defended her rights. She cannot live in a family without respect, and she is no longer afraid. Arriving home, Clara sat down and thought about what had happened. She knew that her life would not be easy, but at least she could speak up. The people in Ethan's family may never change, but she won't let them hurt her anymore. She will find a way to create a new future, even if it means starting from scratch. When Ethan came home, Clara said nothing about the meeting, but he knew well that everything had changed. He could see the determination in her eyes, and he felt a change within himself. Clara is no longer a weak girl. She was strong and ready to face the challenges ahead. And no matter how difficult things get, she knows she is not alone. He will always be by her side. Clara smiled at the thought of what was to come. Today she has regained her power and life will never be the same again. Clara couldn't imagine what her life would be like if she continued to endure indifference and disrespect from her husband's family. That day, as she sat in the deserted room, she felt loneliness engulf her. She cannot continue to live in a relationship full of conflicts and pressure like that. She needed a solution, a way to regain control of her life and stop letting everyone else decide her fate. That night, after returning home and having a short conversation with Ethan, Clara felt that some part of herself had changed. She decided she could not continue living in a family without being loved and respected. She needs to do something to change the current situation. Throughout the evening, Clara thought about all that had happened. She once asked Ethan for help, but he could not interfere in the relationship between her and his mother. It was a very complicated situation, and Clara understood that even if Ethan wanted to, there was nothing he could do but take her side. She decided not to wait any longer. She will change everything herself. Clara remembered the conversation she had with Jessica, her old friend. Jessica has experienced similar difficulties in her husband's family and knows well how to protect herself without hurting her family. She says it's important to have a strategy and to maintain your ego. Clara understood that Jessica was right. She has to be proactive and dare to stand up and say what she feels, even if it might make things more tense. So Clara began to prepare for the next step in her plan. She contacted a lawyer who could help her prepare a legal contract over her property rights, especially the apartment she had previously purchased, to protect it from any appropriation by Margaret and Lisa. She couldn't let things continue the way they wanted, couldn't let herself become a victim of a power game. Clara was prepared to face her mother-in-law and sister-in-law again, but this time, she didn't come just to talk. She comes with a new weapon, a legal contract that will definitely make Margaret and Lisa think again. She knew that this confrontation would not be easy, but Clara also realized that she could no longer continue to live in patience. The next day, Clara returned to Margaret's house. This time, Margaret could not maintain her indifference like the previous times. She went straight to the living room where Margaret was sitting alone. "Mrs. Margaret," Clara began, her voice firm but still polite. "I want to talk to you again about my apartment." Mrs. Margaret did not look at Clara, just sighed softly and put the book on the table. "What do you think you're doing? Coming here to talk about your apartment again?" Mrs. Margaret said, her voice cold. "I don't want to make things any more tense," Clara said, but her voice was firmer than before. "However, I cannot let you and Lisa continue to disregard me and my rights. I have contacted a lawyer to protect my assets, and if necessary, I will ask the law to intervene." Clara's words surprised Margaret. She didn't say anything right away, but there was a bit of worry in her eyes. "Do you think I'm afraid of that?" "You won't get anything easily." Clara did not back down. "I don't want to go any further, but if you and Lisa don't change their ways, I won't have any other choice." Clara's words were a blow to Margaret's confidence. She couldn't accept the fact that Clara was standing up for her rights. At that moment, Lisa suddenly appeared at the door, her eyes filled with contempt. "Mom, don't listen to her. She's nothing. You don't need to be afraid of her," Lisa said, her voice full of challenge. Clara looked at Lisa, feeling like she was trying to overwhelm her, but Clara didn't let her anger take over. "I don't want to create more conflict, but I won't let myself be treated like this again," Clara said, looking straight at Margaret. "If you and Lisa don't change, I will have to do what is necessary to protect myself." Silence covered the whole room. Clara clearly felt the change in the air. Margaret begins to realize that Clara is not someone so easily defeated anymore. Clara stood up, preparing to leave. But before leaving, she turned to look at Margaret and Lisa one more time. "You will not give up. You have the right to be respected and loved as part of this family." Clara walked out of Margaret's house, feeling like she had just overcome a great challenge. She knew that everything was not over, but at least she had a solid step to protect herself. When Clara arrived home, Ethan still hadn't returned, but Clara felt more relieved than ever. She knew she did the right thing. Although there are still many difficulties ahead, Clara is no longer afraid. She stood up for herself, and from now on, she will not let anyone crush her anymore. The next day, Clara woke up early, still feeling the tension of yesterday's confrontation. She looked at the clock on the wall, then looked out the window again. The sky was bright and clear, but her heart felt heavy. She knows that her life will never be the same again, and she is ready to face big changes. Anyway, her life is not what Margaret or Lisa decide. She wondered if she could continue to live in a family where no one really understood her, no respect. But then she told herself that was not a reason for her to give up. She must stand up and take control of her life. When Ethan came home late in the afternoon, Clara couldn't hide the change in her. He looked at her with worried eyes, but then he noticed a new determination in the way she looked at him. "Clara, how are you?" he asked, his voice gentle but also filled with concern. Clara smiled softly, a real smile. "I'm fine, Ethan. I know what to do." Ethan sat down next to her, putting his arms around her. "I know you're strong, but can we overcome these difficulties?" Clara felt the sincerity in his question, but she also knew that only she could overcome these challenges. "We'll do it, Ethan. But I need you to stand by me. We'll get through it together." Ethan's support is always a great encouragement to Clara, and this time is no exception. But Clara knew that it was important for her to stand up for herself and not let anyone else make her feel weak or inadequate. Over the course of the next week, Clara began working with her attorney to ensure that her property interests would be protected and that Margaret could no longer interfere with her decisions. She also decided not to go back to see Margaret and Lisa until everything was clear. Although she does not want to distance herself from her husband's family, she understands that if she wants to gain respect, she must take a firm stance and protect what belongs to her. One day, while Clara was working at home, her phone rang. At first, she thought it was a normal call, but when she saw the phone number from Margaret, she was a bit surprised. "Clara, it's you." Margaret's voice came through the phone, full of worry. "Can I see you for a moment?" Clara felt a change in her voice. She is no longer as cold as before. She thought for a while, then decided to meet her, but this time she wouldn't let herself get hurt. "I will come, but only if you can talk seriously," Clara replied. Clara went to Margaret's house that afternoon. This time she didn't feel as nervous as before. She knew she was doing the right thing. When Margaret opened the door, Clara noticed a bit of worry in her eyes. "Clara, you've thought a lot about everything," Margaret said, her voice softer than usual. "I know I was wrong to treat you like that. I'm sorry." Clara was a little surprised by her grandmother's apology, but she didn't let her emotions blind her. "You don't have to apologize, Margaret. What you did to me was unacceptable. I just need you to respect me as part of this family," Clara said, her voice steady. Margaret looked at her for a moment, then sighed. "Mom, you know your daughter isn't always right. But she's really strong, Clara. And I know you can't just protect Lisa forever." Clara looked at her, feeling a sense of relief in her heart. "You don't need to protect anyone. You just need to respect and treat everyone fairly. And that's what I ask." Mrs. Margaret was silent, then nodded. "Sure, you were wrong, and you'll do it again." Clara felt the sincerity in her words. Although Margaret did not change easily, she knew that at least she realized her mistakes. She was no longer as determined against her as before. The meeting ended with a handshake, and Clara knew she had taken a big step in restoring respect and relationships within her husband's family. However, Clara also realizes that although her relationship with Margaret has improved, she and Lisa have not been able to fully reconcile. Lisa is still the only person in the family who makes her feel the hardest. Clara didn't know what to do with her, but she understood that standing up for her rights was the most important thing right now. After all that has happened, Clara realizes that life does not always go according to plan, and sometimes greater challenges help us become stronger. Not only did she win the confrontation with Margaret and Lisa, but she also won over herself, over the fears and uncertainties that had previously prevented her from standing up. Clara knows that, no matter how difficult life gets, she will always protect herself and what she deserves. Later, Clara and Ethan begin to rebuild their lives, not only with love, but also with mutual understanding and respect. The relationship between Clara and Margaret gradually improved, although not quite the same as before, but at least now they could see each other with respect. Clara is no longer afraid of facing challenges. She understands that sometimes life needs big changes so we can live true to ourselves. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more emotional and inspiring life stories, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Join us on this journey as we dive into more heartfelt tales of love, strength, and resilience. Your support means the world to us, and we can't wait to share even more incredible stories with you. So, make sure to subscribe and stay tuned for the next chapter. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Thanks for being part of our community. See you in the next video.